Your mind is either training you to win or training you to break the moment life gets hard. And the scary part is, this usually doesn't happen in obvious ways. It happens quietly, in the way you talk to yourself when pressure hits, in the way your focus disappears the second things feel uncomfortable, in the way your mood decides whether you act, your impulses decide whether you stay steady, and your emotions start leading your behavior before your mind even has a chance to speak. That is why some people look strong on the outside, but fall apart in real situations. Not because they are weak, not because life is unfair, and not because they were born without what it takes. They fall apart because they never trained the place where every battle begins, the mind. Maybe you've felt this yourself. You know what you should do, but in the moment, you hesitate. You overthink. You react too fast. You lose focus. You let stress take over. You let one bad moment poison the rest of the day. And after a while, what really wears you down is not just life itself. It is the feeling that your own mind is making everything heavier than it needs to be. But here is the good news. The mind can be trained. You can train it to stay calm when pressure rises. You can train it to pause before reacting. You can train it to hold focus when everything around you is noisy. You can train it to keep moving when comfort is calling you backward. You can train it to stop turning every challenge into panic, every delay into doubt, and every uncomfortable moment into a reason to quit. Because winning in every situation does not mean life always goes your way. It means you stop losing control of yourself when life does not. It means you stop handing your power to stress, distraction, fear, and mood. It means you become someone who can still think clearly in chaos, still move with discipline under pressure, and still protect your direction when everything around you is trying to pull you off course. That kind of strength changes everything. It changes how you work, how you decide, how you recover, how you handle people, how you deal with pain, and how you carry yourself in moments that would have broken the older version of you. If you want to build that kind of mind, subscribe to the channel. And now, let's begin with the first chapter. Win inside first. If you lose the battle inside your head, it almost doesn't matter what is happening outside of you. You can have talent, opportunity, support, even a clear plan, and still ruin the moment because your inner state is working against you. You hesitate when you should move. You panic when you should think. You doubt yourself when you should stay steady. And from the outside, it looks like the problem is pressure, bad luck, or timing. But very often, the real loss happened earlier, in the private space where your thoughts turned against you before life even had the chance to test you fully. That is why real victory always starts inside first. Before you win in work, you have to win against distraction. Before you win in conflict, you have to win against impulsive emotion. Before you win in difficulty, you have to win against the part of your mind that immediately wants comfort, escape, drama, or surrender. Every external result is touched by an internal condition. The way you think changes the way you act. The way you act changes the direction of your life. So if your inner world is full of noise, fear, resentment, and hesitation, that confusion will eventually show up in your decisions. A lot of people try to fix their life from the outside in. They change the routine, the job, the goal, the environment, the strategy. Sometimes that helps, of course, but if the mind underneath all of it is still weak, scattered, and easily shaken, the same patterns return in a different form. The place changes, but the struggle follows. The opportunity changes, but the self-sabotage stays the same. The reason is simple. You took the same untrained mind into a new situation and expected a different result. That is why this first chapter matters so much. You are not just trying to improve performance. You are trying to become someone whose inner world is not constantly making life harder than it needs to be. And this starts with honesty. You have to notice what happens inside you when things stop going your way. Do you become dramatic in your own head? Do you make one setback mean too much? Do you instantly speak to yourself like a defeated person? Do you let one mistake turn into a whole identity? Because that is where losing often begins, not in failure itself, but in the meaning you attach to it. One bad moment becomes, "I always mess things up." One rejection becomes, "Maybe I'm not enough." One delay becomes, "Nothing ever works for me." And once the mind starts talking like that, the body usually follows. Energy drops, focus weakens, action slows down. But the opposite is also true. When the inside is strong, the outside loses some of its power to shake you. A setback still hurts, but it does not own you. Pressure still exists, but it does not confuse you. Uncertainty is still uncomfortable, but it does not stop you from moving. This is what inner victory looks like. It is not fake positivity. It is not pretending everything is fine. It is the ability to stay aligned with yourself even when life becomes inconvenient, painful, or unclear. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." That line matters because it brings you back to the only place where real strength can be built, not in controlling the world, in learning not to collapse inside it. So ask yourself a better question from now on. Not, "How do I make life easier?" but "How do I become steadier inside difficult moments?" That question changes everything. It turns problems into training. It turns pressure into self-observation. It turns ordinary frustration into a chance to build command over your thoughts instead of obedience to them. Because once you start winning inside first, something powerful happens. You stop depending so much on perfect conditions. You stop waiting for confidence to magically appear. You stop letting emotions vote on every decision. You begin to lead yourself, quietly, firmly, repeatedly. And that is where real winning begins, not when the world finally cooperates, but when your own mind does. Chapter 2. Control your attention. Your attention is your life in motion. Whatever keeps pulling your mind keeps shaping your days. Whatever keeps interrupting you keeps directing you. And after a while, what you pay attention to does not just affect your mood for a moment. It starts building your character, your habits, your energy, and even the kind of future you are slowly walking into without fully realizing it. That is why attention is never a small thing. A distracted mind does not just lose focus, it loses direction. It starts the day with good intentions, then gets pulled into messages, noise, comparison, random thoughts, other people's urgency, pointless scrolling, old memories, imagined problems, and little emotional reactions that steal far more energy than they seem to. By the end of the day, you feel tired, but not satisfied, busy, but not clear, mentally full, but strangely unaccomplished. And the worst part is that this can happen so often that it starts to feel normal. But it is not normal. It is training. Every time your attention is easily stolen, you are training your mind to obey interruption. Every time you let your focus drift toward whatever is loudest, newest, or emotionally charged, you are teaching yourself to live at the mercy of stimulation instead of intention. That is why so many people feel mentally weak without understanding why. It is not always because they lack intelligence or ambition, It is because their attention has been fragmented for so long that they can no longer hold themselves in one place long enough to build anything deep. And that matters in every area of life. If you cannot control your attention, you will struggle to control your emotions, because your mind will keep feeding on whatever provokes you. If you cannot control your attention, you will struggle to stay disciplined, because the next urge, distraction, or discomfort will keep pulling you away from the thing that actually matters. If you cannot control your attention, even your relationships will suffer, because you will be physically present while mentally scattered, always half there, always partly consumed by something else. This is why mental strength begins with learning to keep your mind where you choose to place it, not where fear sends it, not where boredom sends it, not where your phone sends it, not where other people's chaos sends it, where you choose. That sounds simple, but it is one of the hardest forms of self-control in modern life, because the world is constantly fighting for your attention. Every platform wants it, every notification wants it, every opinion wants it, every headline, every piece of drama, every algorithm, every little emotional trigger is trying to hook your mind and keep it there. And if you are not careful, you start living in reaction to whatever captures you first. Then your life no longer feels like your own. It feels hijacked. Marcus Aurelius said, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts, and the quality of your thoughts depends heavily on what you repeatedly allow into your attention. A mind that constantly feeds on noise becomes noisy. A mind that constantly feeds on comparison becomes restless. A mind that constantly feeds on urgency becomes anxious." So if you want a stronger mind, you cannot only ask, "What should I do?" You also have to ask, "What has been training my attention every day?" Because attention works like water, it gives life to whatever it keeps touching. If you keep pouring it into resentment, resentment grows. If you keep pouring it into fear, fear grows. If you keep pouring it into distractions, shallow habits grow. But if you pour it into useful work, into training, into silence, into clear thought, into the few things that actually move your life forward, then slowly your inner world begins to organize itself around what matters. That is where control returns. And this does not mean becoming extreme or trying to live like a machine. It means becoming more deliberate. It means noticing when your mind wanders and bringing it back. It means not giving every message the same importance. It means not treating every thought like an emergency. It means learning to sit with one task, one conversation, one problem, one goal, without needing constant escape. At first, this can feel uncomfortable because distraction has become a form of relief for many people. The second, something feels slow, difficult, uncertain, or emotionally demanding, the mind looks for somewhere else to go. But every time you resist that pull, even for a few minutes, you are building something real. You are proving to yourself that your mind does not have to run every time life stops being easy. And that changes more than people realize, because once your attention becomes stronger, your decisions get cleaner, your work gets deeper, your emotions calm down faster, your energy stops leaking into 10 directions at once. You become more present, more solid, less easily shaken. Not because the world got quieter, but because you stopped giving everything access to your mind. So protect your attention like it matters, because it does. It is not just focus, it is authorship. It is the power to decide what gets to shape you and what does not. And the person who can direct their attention on purpose is already far more in control than the person who keeps reacting to whatever pulls hardest. Chapter 3. Train your self-talk. The way you speak to yourself becomes the atmosphere you live in. That voice in your head is not just background noise. It is shaping how you interpret pressure, how you recover from mistakes, how much courage you have when something feels uncertain, and how quickly you collapse when life does not go the way you wanted. A lot of people are trying to become stronger while carrying an inner voice that keeps weakening them every day. And after a while, the damage is not only emotional, it becomes behavioral. You hesitate more. You doubt yourself faster. You pull back too early. You stop trusting your own ability to handle hard things, not because you actually can't, but because the conversation inside your head keeps training you to expect failure, embarrassment, or defeat. That is why self-talk matters so much. You do not need to say these thoughts out loud for them to control you. It is enough that they repeat. A quiet sentence like, "I'm always behind," can start changing how you move through the day. A thought like, "I can't handle this," does more than express fear. It gives fear authority. Then the mind starts gathering proof. Every inconvenience becomes evidence. Every mistake becomes confirmation. Every delay starts to feel personal. Without noticing it, you begin living inside a story that keeps shrinking you. And that story is rarely neutral. When people speak harshly to themselves, they often think they are being realistic. They call it honesty. They tell themselves they are just telling the truth. But there is a difference between clarity and internal cruelty. Clarity says, "That was a weak decision. Fix it." Cruelty says, "You always ruin things." Clarity helps you adjust. Cruelty makes you identify with the failure. One leads to movement, the other leads to shame. And shame is heavy. It drains energy. It clouds judgment. It makes even simple actions feel harder than they need to be. You can see this clearly in difficult moments. When pressure rises, your self-talk usually reveals its true shape. Some people miss one step and immediately turn against themselves. One bad conversation, one mistake at work, one moment of weakness, and the mind starts attacking. It says things that no wise friend would ever say. It exaggerates. It generalizes. It takes one event and turns it into a verdict on the whole person. That kind of inner voice does not make you disciplined. It makes you unstable. Marcus Aurelius had a quiet understanding of this. He kept bringing himself back to reason, not because he had no emotions, but because he knew the mind needs guidance. Left alone, it can become dramatic, self-pitying, reactive, and distorted. A trained mind learns to speak in a way that steadies itself. Not soft, not fake, steady. That is the real goal here. Not positive thinking, not pretending everything is fine, not repeating empty affirmations that fall apart the moment life gets uncomfortable. What you need is a voice inside you that can stay honest without becoming destructive. A voice that knows how to say, "This is hard, but stay with it." A voice that can say, "You made a mistake, but do not turn it into an identity." A voice that reminds you, "Calm down, look clearly, take the next step." That kind of self-talk changes everything because it keeps the moment from owning you. When your mind knows how to speak well under pressure, you recover faster. You stop feeding panic with more panic. You stop making ordinary discomfort feel catastrophic. You start becoming someone who can stay functional inside emotion instead of being ruled by it. That matters more than people realize. Life is full of moments where no one is coming to calm you down. No one is there to correct your thoughts in real time. In those moments, the quality of your inner voice becomes part of your strength. So listen carefully to how you speak to yourself this week. Not in a dramatic way, just pay attention. Notice what shows up when you are tired, frustrated, embarrassed, or under pressure. Notice whether your mind speaks like a guide or like an enemy. Notice whether the voice inside you actually helps you move forward, or whether it keeps pushing you deeper into doubt. Because the truth is, you will hear your own voice more than anyone else's for the rest of your life. It will be there when you fail, when you try again, when you're afraid, when you're building, when you're waiting, when you're breaking, and when you're becoming. If that voice is careless, your life becomes heavier. If that voice is trained, your life becomes steadier. And once that voice starts working for you instead of against you, even difficult moments stop feeling quite so powerful. Chapter 4. Trust your standards. A weak day becomes dangerous when you have nothing solid to return to. That is the real value of standards. They protect you from becoming a different person every time your mood changes. Without them, you live too close to impulse. You do what feels easy when energy is low, what feels comforting when pressure rises, what feels popular when other people are watching, what feels convenient when discipline starts asking something from you. The problem is not just inconsistency. The deeper problem is that your life starts being shaped by temporary states instead of stable principles. And temporary states are terrible leaders. This is why so many people feel strong only when life is smooth. They can be focused when motivation is high, calm when nothing is threatening them, disciplined when the schedule is clean, confident when they are getting praise. But the second discomfort enters the room, everything shifts. They bend too quickly. They lower the bar. They negotiate with themselves. They make exceptions that slowly become a lifestyle. What looked like strength was really just comfort with good conditions. Standards reveal whether your mind has something deeper than mood to stand on. A standard is not a wish. It is not something you say when you feel inspired. It is a line you have decided not to cross, even when crossing it would be easier in the moment. It is the quiet decision that says, "This is how I handle myself now." Not because life always rewards it immediately, not because anyone is clapping, simply because you are no longer willing to live beneath the level of discipline, honesty, and self-respect that you know you need. That changes the way you move through pressure. When your standards are clear, decision-making becomes cleaner. You waste less energy arguing with yourself every time temptation shows up. You do not have to reinvent your values in the middle of a hard moment. You already know where you stand. That gives the mind something stable to return to when emotions become noisy. It gives structure to your behavior when the situation is unclear. It stops every moment from turning into a negotiation. This matters more than people realize, because a lot of mental exhaustion comes from internal debate. Should I do it today or skip it? Should I answer this in anger or stay quiet? Should I go back to what drained me just because I feel lonely tonight? Should I lower the standard because I had a stressful week? When there is no inner code, every situation becomes a fresh argument. The mind gets tired, not only from life, but from constantly having to decide what kind of person it is going to be. Strong standards remove some of that chaos. They do not make life easy, but they make you clearer. You begin to say no faster to what weakens you. You stop giving endless attention to things you already know are beneath your values. You become less emotionally negotiable. That does not mean rigid or cold. It means anchored. There is a difference. A rigid person resists reality because of ego. An anchored person stays loyal to what matters because without that loyalty, they know they will drift. Epictetus understood this deeply. He kept returning to the idea that character is built by what you repeatedly choose when no one can force you either way. That is where standards become identity, not in the big speeches, in the private choices, in whether you keep your word when no one would know if you didn't, in whether you stay honest when lying would be easier, in whether you keep showing restraint when emotion tries to pull you toward immediate relief. You feel the power of standards most clearly on the days when you do not feel like being your best self. Those are the days that expose everything, days when you are tired, annoyed, discouraged, distracted, or disappointed. Days when the mind starts offering little excuses that sound harmless. Just this once. You deserve a break. It does not matter that much. Start again tomorrow. But that is exactly where standards prove their worth. They remind you that the person you are becoming cannot depend entirely on what feels pleasant in the moment. This does not mean perfection. Standards are not there to make you hate yourself for being human. They are there to keep you from sliding too far every time life gets uncomfortable. They help you recover your direction faster. They shorten the distance between falling off and returning to yourself. And over time, that matters more than the occasional perfect day, because a strong life is not built by rare intensity. It is built by having something steady enough to guide you when intensity disappears. So, trust your standards, especially when your feelings are loud. Trust them when you are tempted to lower yourself just to relieve the pressure of the moment. Trust them when others around you are acting without discipline and calling it freedom. Trust them when the easier option is trying to look reasonable. Your standards are not there to restrict your life. They are there to keep your life from being ruled by whatever feels strongest for 5 minutes. And the more you trust them, the more your mind starts to understand something important. You are no longer available for every version of yourself. Chapter 5. Discipline over mood. The moment your actions depend too much on how you feel, your life becomes unstable. That is the real problem with mood. It changes quickly, and it always has a convincing reason. Some days you feel sharp, motivated, and ready to move. Other days your energy is low, your mind is heavy, and even small tasks feel bigger than they are. If you let those internal shifts decide what gets done and what gets abandoned, then progress stops being something you build. It becomes something you visit whenever your emotions happen to cooperate. And emotions are not built for that kind of leadership. They are real. They matter. They can tell you something important, but they are unreliable as a system. A mood can be affected by lack of sleep, stress, comparison, disappointment, hormones, weather, one difficult conversation, one memory, one bad hour. If your discipline rises and falls with all of that, then you are handing over too much control to forces that change by the minute. This is why some people keep restarting their lives. They do not lack desire. They do not lack vision. They do not even lack intelligence. What they lack is the ability to keep moving when the emotional reward is gone. They work hard when they feel inspired, then disappear when the process becomes repetitive. They commit strongly when the goal feels exciting, then pull back the moment boredom, discomfort, or frustration enters the room. They mistake strong feelings for strength, but those are not the same thing. Strong feelings can get you started. Only discipline keeps you going when the shine wears off. That difference changes everything. A person ruled by mood is always negotiating. They make promises in one emotional state and break them in another. They call it balance, self-care, or listening to themselves. But often what they are really listening to is resistance. And resistance is clever. It rarely says, destroy your progress. It says, skip today. It says, you'll do better tomorrow. It says, you're not in the right headspace. It says, this won't matter. The language sounds gentle, even reasonable. But if you obey it too often, your mind learns a dangerous lesson. Discomfort is enough to make you stop. That lesson weakens you. Not only because things stay unfinished, but because you stop trusting yourself. You begin to sense that your word means very little once a feeling changes. You tell yourself you are going to wake up early, stay focused, train, write, study, have the hard conversation, keep the boundary. And then mood shows up with a different suggestion, and once again you bend. Over time, that does something painful. It makes you uncertain in your own eyes. You start doubting whether you can rely on yourself when it matters. Discipline repairs that, not in one dramatic moment, but in quiet repetitions. It teaches your mind that action can happen even when motivation is absent. It proves that a low mood does not have to become a lost day. It creates a deeper kind of confidence, the kind that is not based on excitement, but on evidence. You know you can keep moving because you have already done it when it was inconvenient, dull, lonely, and hard. That is a very different kind of strength. Marcus Aurelius kept reminding himself, in one way or another, that the task still remains, even when the feeling is gone. He did not build his life around waiting to be in the perfect state. He brought himself back to duty, not because he was emotionless, but because he understood that a meaningful life cannot be built on the unstable ground of preference. There will always be days when you do not feel like being disciplined. The question is whether those days get to decide who you become. And this is where discipline becomes something much more personal than productivity. It becomes self-respect. Because every time you keep a promise to yourself in a low moment, something inside you strengthens. Every time you do the work without needing to feel inspired first, your identity shifts a little. You stop seeing yourself as someone who tries when it feels good. You start becoming someone who can be counted on. That matters in work, in health, in relationships, in recovery, in everything. Reliability is power. It gives your life shape. It gives your goals weight. It removes some of the chaos that comes from constantly starting over. Of course, this does not mean becoming harsh with yourself in a foolish way. There is a difference between discipline and self-punishment. Discipline is steady. It knows when to rest, but it does not use rest as an excuse to abandon direction. It adapts without surrendering. It makes adjustments without turning one hard day into a reason to disappear for a week. That is the balance worth building. So stop asking your mood for permission to do what your life needs. Some days it will agree with you, some days it will not. Either way, the work remains. The standard remains. The next step remains. And the more often you act without waiting for the right feeling, the more your mind begins to understand a truth that can change your whole life. You do not need to feel ready in order to be consistent. Chapter 6. Delay the impulse. A strong mind is often revealed in one small moment, the moment it does not obey immediately. That pause matters more than it seems. A lot of damage in life is not caused by evil intentions or major stupidity. It comes from speed. Speaking too fast when you feel offended. Buying something to escape a feeling. Sending the message you should have waited on. Saying yes because silence felt awkward. Quitting because discomfort showed up. Reaching for relief before you have even understood what is really happening inside you. The impulse promises quick comfort, but very often it leaves a longer problem behind. This is why the ability to delay an impulse is such a clear sign of mental strength. It means there is space between feeling and action. It means your mind is not so undisciplined that every urge gets treated like an order. That space is where self-command begins. Without it, life becomes expensive. You pay for temporary reactions with lasting consequences. One burst of anger can damage trust. One weak decision can restart a pattern you were trying to break. One emotional purchase can come from 10 minutes of stress and create months of regret. One impulsive response can pull you into conflict you never needed. In the moment, all of it feels justified. That is what makes impulsive behavior dangerous. It rarely introduces itself as self-sabotage. It arrives wearing the mask of relief, honesty, urgency, or freedom. The mind says, "Do it now, say it now, fix the feeling now." But not every feeling deserves an immediate action. Sometimes what feels urgent is only discomfort asking to be discharged as quickly as possible. The impulse wants to move energy out of the body. It wants release. It does not care whether the action is wise. It only cares whether the tension drops for a moment. That is why so many people keep repeating the same mistakes, even when they already know better. Knowledge is present, but the pause is missing, and that pause is trainable. You build it the same way you build any real form of discipline, by practicing interruption. Not dramatic interruption, simple interruption. You feel the urge, and instead of moving with it automatically, you stop. You breathe. You wait a little longer than is comfortable. You let the emotional wave rise without instantly converting it into behavior. At first, this feels unnatural because impulse is used to being obeyed. It is used to having authority. The first few times you resist it, your whole system can feel irritated. But that irritation is not failure. It is proof that training is happening. What changes in that pause is not only behavior. Perception changes too. A feeling that looked absolute starts to soften. The thing you were about to say no longer feels necessary. The decision that seemed obvious begins to look careless. The craving loses some of its force. The pressure becomes more readable. Once you are not moving at the speed of the urge, you can actually see it. And seeing it clearly gives you power that was unavailable a few seconds earlier. This is where calm starts becoming practical. Calm is not only useful in emergencies. It is useful in ordinary life, in tiny moments that would otherwise keep directing you without your consent. The pause before opening the distracting app. The pause before replying from ego. The pause before agreeing to something you do not want. The pause before turning one bad feeling into a bad decision. These moments rarely look important while they are happening, but they shape your character quietly. They decide whether you are becoming someone who is led from within or someone who is constantly pushed around by whatever rises fastest. Epictetus understood this kind of inner freedom. He kept coming back to the idea that what disturbs us is not the event itself, but our judgments and reactions around it. That matters here because impulse often skips judgment altogether. It moves before reflection has a chance to enter. Delaying the impulse restores that chance. It gives reason a seat at the table, and that has consequences far beyond self-control. When you stop obeying every urge, you become harder to manipulate, harder to provoke, harder to bait into decisions that do not match your values. You stop being such an easy target for pressure, temptation, and emotional heat. You gain a steadiness that other people can feel, not because you have become cold, but because there is a visible difference between having emotions and being ruled by them. So do not underestimate the power of a short delay. A few seconds of restraint can protect years of work. A brief pause can save dignity, money, peace, trust, direction. It can keep a passing feeling from becoming a lasting consequence. The impulse will always make its case. It will tell you that speed is strength, that release is necessary, that this moment is different. But a trained mind learns not to bow so quickly. It listens, waits, and chooses more carefully. And often, that small delay is the exact moment where winning begins. Chapter 7. Control your reactions. A lot of power is lost in moments that last only a few seconds. Someone says the wrong thing, a message arrives with a cold tone, a plan falls apart, you feel disrespected, ignored, misunderstood, challenged, exposed. The body tightens before the mind has even caught up. Your chest changes. Your face changes. Your thoughts start speeding. Then comes the dangerous part, the urge to react before you understand what is really happening. In those moments, people often believe they are expressing strength. What they are usually expressing is lost control. That is why reactions matter so much. A reaction feels natural because it is immediate. It gives the illusion of honesty. It tells you that if something hit you, you should hit back. If something triggered you, you should answer it quickly. If something embarrassed you, you should defend yourself right now. But immediate does not mean true, and it definitely does not mean wise. Very often your first reaction is just your untrained nervous system trying to regain control by creating movement. It wants to discharge discomfort. It does not care whether the response protects your peace, your dignity, or your long-term direction. This is where people give themselves away. They reveal too much too fast. They show exactly what gets under their skin. They let one comment pull them into an argument, one delay ruin their whole mood, one person's behavior decide the atmosphere inside them. And once that pattern becomes common, life starts controlling them through pressure points. Their peace becomes easy to interrupt. Their attention becomes easy to hijack. Their emotional state becomes available to anyone skilled enough to provoke it. That is not strength. That is exposure. A controlled reaction does not mean you feel nothing. It means the feeling does not take over the steering wheel before you have looked at the road. There is a huge difference between experiencing anger and becoming obedient to it. There is a difference between feeling hurt and immediately building a response from that wound. Most people never learn that difference, so they spend years calling themselves honest when they are really just impulsive. The mind gets stronger when it learns how to stay in the moment without surrendering to it. Sometimes the best response is silence for a few minutes. Sometimes it is a slower tone instead of a sharper one. Sometimes it is choosing not to explain yourself while you are still emotionally flooded. Sometimes it is walking away, sleeping on it, waiting until the emotional smoke clears enough for you to see what actually deserves your energy. That kind of control is not passive, it is disciplined. It keeps a temporary emotion from creating a permanent consequence. Marcus Aurelius returned again and again to the idea that the mind can choose its stance, not the event itself, not other people's behavior, not the fact that something difficult happened, but the stance you take toward it. That is a powerful thing to remember because it brings you back to where your real authority is. The world will keep doing what the world does. People will still disappoint you, misunderstand you, test you, provoke you, and project onto you. The question is whether they also get to choreograph your inner life. Once you start watching your reactions closely, you notice something important. Many of them are not really about the present moment. They are old patterns dressed in current clothes. A tone reminds you of a past dismissal. A delay touches an old insecurity. A disagreement wakes up a fear of rejection. Then you react to more than what is actually in front of you. You react to memory, ego, fear, pride, exhaustion, and stored tension all at once. no wonder the response becomes bigger than the situation. That is why slowing down changes everything. When you pause, the moment starts separating itself. You can see what belongs to now and what belongs to old pain. You can see whether this situation truly deserves a response or whether it is simply pressing on a place inside you that still needs work. That kind of clarity saves energy. It saves relationships. It saves you from turning every emotional spark into a fire. And there is something else people rarely mention. Controlled reactions create respect. Not always in the shallow sense that others admire you immediately, but in the deeper sense that your presence stops feeling easy to shake. People can feel when someone is stable. They can feel when a person is not available for emotional bait, not quick to collapse, not eager to fight over every small thing. That steadiness changes the way life meets you. You become harder to manipulate because you are no longer giving instant access to your nervous system. You become harder to drain because you are not answering every disturbance with equal intensity. You become clearer because your energy is no longer spilling out of you every time something unpleasant happens. So control your reactions, not because you want to look calm, but because you do not want every outside event to keep renting space inside you. Let the first feeling arrive. Let it be real, but do not let it become your master. Give yourself a moment, breathe once, see more clearly, then decide what deserves action and what only deserved patience. Because the person who controls their reactions is no longer living at the mercy of the moment. Chapter 8. Build emotional control. Emotional control is not about becoming numb. It is about refusing to let a temporary feeling become your permanent direction. That distinction matters because a lot of people hear the phrase "control your emotions" and immediately think it means suppression. They imagine someone cold, distant, disconnected from life, pretending not to care. But that is not strength. That is often fear wearing a disciplined face. Real emotional control looks different. You still feel deeply. You still get hurt, frustrated, disappointed, anxious, excited. The difference is that those feelings no longer get automatic authority over your behavior. That changes everything. Without emotional control, life becomes harder than it already is. A setback does not stay a setback. It turns into panic. A disagreement does not stay a disagreement. It becomes resentment, replayed again and again in your head. A moment of insecurity becomes a whole day of self-doubt. A delay becomes agitation. A mistake becomes shame. The feeling arrives, and instead of being experienced, it takes over the whole room. It colors your thinking, changes your tone, distorts your judgment, and quietly pushes you into decisions that do not reflect your best mind. This is where many people suffer twice. First, from the event itself, and then from the way their emotions begin running unchecked through everything that follows. The original problem might have been small. What makes it destructive is how far it spreads once the inner world loses structure. One stressful hour ruins the evening. One painful conversation affects the next 3 interactions. One moment of anger changes the way you speak to someone who had nothing to do with it. When emotion is leading, it rarely stays in its lane. That is why emotional control is such a serious form of strength. It keeps one feeling from governing the entire day. A trained mind learns to say, in effect, "This is real, but it is not in charge." That sentence alone can save you from so much unnecessary damage. Because once you stop treating every emotion like a command, you begin to create space inside yourself. In that space, you can actually observe what is happening. You can notice whether this sadness needs rest, whether this anger is covering hurt, whether this anxiety is coming from reality or from projection. You become less fused with the feeling. You stop calling every wave an identity. That makes you more stable in ways people can actually feel. When someone has emotional control, their presence changes. They do not turn every inconvenience into an atmosphere. They do not make everyone else pay for what they have not processed. They do not force the entire room to carry the weather inside them. There is a steadiness to them, not because they are emotionless, but because they know how to contain what they feel long enough to respond with some dignity. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He did not try to remove emotion from life. He kept trying to remove its tyranny. He knew that if the mind is not trained, it becomes too easy for anger, fear, and desire to start dictating action. And once that happens, even intelligence becomes unreliable. A person can know better and still act worse simply because emotion arrived first and reason arrived too late. That is why emotional control has to be practiced before the big moments come. You build it in smaller moments, when irritation shows up and you decide not to sharpen your tone. When anxiety starts spinning and you return to the facts instead of feeding the story. When disappointment hits and you let yourself feel it without letting it define the rest of the day. When someone provokes you and you notice the heat rising, but you do not hand them your behavior. Little moments like these are not small at all. They are rehearsals for bigger tests. And it is worth saying something important here. Emotional control does not mean you always look calm on the outside. Sometimes it means stepping away before you speak. Sometimes it means sitting with an uncomfortable feeling instead of discharging it onto someone else. Sometimes it means admitting, quietly and honestly, that you are not in the right state to make a decision yet. That is control too. Choosing not to act while distorted is one of the clearest signs that your emotions are no longer running the system. The alternative is costly. When feelings lead too often, you become easier to manipulate, easier to exhaust, easier to confuse. Other people do not even have to overpower you. They only have to trigger you. Then your own emotional pattern does the rest. You start saying things you regret, making choices you would not make in a clear state, and giving away energy that should have stayed yours. After enough of those moments, you begin to feel like a stranger to yourself. Emotional control brings you back. It gives you the ability to feel without drowning, to pause without shutting down, to stay human without becoming chaotic. Over time, this becomes one of the strongest forms of inner trust. You know that even when life hits hard, you are less likely to turn that pain into more damage. You know you can carry a difficult feeling without immediately obeying it. You know that your inner world may shake, but it doesn't have to collapse. And that is a powerful place to live from. Because the goal is not to erase emotion. The goal is to become big enough inside that emotion no longer gets to decide who you are in the moment it arrives. Chapter 9. Stay calm under pressure. Pressure does not create your mind. It reveals it. That is why calm matters so much. Not because calm looks impressive, and not because it makes you seem above everything, but because pressure changes what people can access inside themselves. When stress rises, untrained minds get noisy. They rush, they assume, they overreact, they make simple problems heavier, and they confuse movement with control. In those moments, the real advantage does not belong to the loudest person, the fastest person, or even the most emotional one. It belongs to the person who can stay clear enough to see what is actually happening. That kind of calm is not weakness. It is useful strength. A lot of people misunderstand this. They think calm means passive, soft, too slow for real life. They think pressure should make you intense because intensity feels powerful. But intensity without clarity usually creates more mistakes. It burns energy badly. It narrows perception. It makes people respond to the first version of the problem instead of the real one. Pressure already makes a situation harder. Panic adds a second problem on top of the first. You can see this everywhere. In conflict, the calmer person usually sees more. In work, the person who stays composed under pressure protects decision quality. In personal crises, the one who does not mentally collapse becomes the one who can actually act. Calm gives you access to your judgment when other people are handing theirs over to urgency. That is why this chapter is not really about looking calm. It is about keeping access to yourself when the moment gets heavy, because pressure does something specific to the mind. It speeds up interpretation. Suddenly, everything feels larger, more final, more threatening than it really is. One problem starts sounding like a disaster. One obstacle starts feeling like proof that things are falling apart. The body reacts quickly, and then the mind starts building a story to match the feeling. If you are not trained, you believe the story immediately. You start speaking from it, deciding from it, and spreading its chaos into everything around you. Calm interrupts that chain. It gives you one priceless thing in hard moments: a little more time inside yourself. Enough time to separate facts from fear. Enough time to ask what really matters right now. Enough time to stop your nervous system from becoming the leader of the situation. That short gap is where many good outcomes begin. Not because calm magically removes difficulty, but because it keeps difficulty from multiplying. This is one of the quiet lessons behind Stoic strength. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to the need for steadiness, not because his life was peaceful, but because it was not. Responsibility, conflict, uncertainty, loss, pressure. He lived with all of it. And still, he kept bringing himself back to the same inner command. Do not let the moment throw your mind into disorder. That is not poetic advice. It is practical survival. A disordered mind makes life more dangerous than it already is. Still, calm is not something you fake when the storm arrives. It has to be built beforehand. You build it in small daily moments, by refusing to turn every inconvenience into mental drama, by not making every delay personal, by noticing when your body tenses and choosing to slow your breathing instead of speeding up your thoughts, by staying measured in conversations that tempt you to become reactive, by learning that discomfort is not always an emergency. These little acts look ordinary, but they are training your system to remain more stable when the stakes get higher. Then, when real pressure comes, you are not starting from zero. You already know how to return to yourself. You already know how to lower the volume inside. You already know that the first wave of stress is not always the truth of the situation. This does not make you fearless. It makes you functional. And that matters much more. Fear may still appear. Uncertainty may still shake you. The difference is that now they do not get full control of your behavior. People trust calm for a reason. It feels solid. It suggests that even if the moment is difficult, someone is still present enough to think. That presence becomes a form of leadership, whether you are alone or with others. You lead yourself better, and you stop adding unnecessary emotional weight to what is already hard. So when pressure rises, do not ask, "How do I get rid of this feeling immediately?" Ask something better. How do I stay clear enough to handle this well? That question changes your relationship with stress. It turns calm into skill, not personality. It reminds you that steadiness is not something you either have or do not have. It is something you practice until your mind stops treating pressure like permission to fall apart. And once that happens, you begin to notice a real advantage. Difficult moments stop owning so much of you. Chapter 10. Think clearly in chaos. Chaos does not only happen around you, it starts happening inside you too. That is what makes difficult moments so dangerous. The problem is rarely just the problem, it is the noise that rushes in with it. Conflicting thoughts, fast assumptions, fear trying to predict the worst, emotion trying to rush a conclusion, other people bringing their urgency, their panic, their opinions, their pressure. Before long, the situation becomes mentally crowded, and when the mind gets crowded, clarity becomes one of the first things to disappear. This is why so many bad decisions happen in chaotic moments, not because people are incapable, but because they stop seeing cleanly. They grab at the first solution, react to the loudest voice, confuse motion with progress, or let panic choose the frame through which everything is interpreted. What needed careful attention gets treated like an emergency. What needed patience gets forced. What needed a clear head gets handed over to stress. A trained mind learns to do something different. It reduces before it reacts. That is the heart of clear thinking in chaos. You do not try to solve everything at once. You do not give equal importance to every thought entering your head. You do not let noise present itself as truth, just because it arrived with intensity. Instead, you begin separating. What is fact and what is fear? What matters now and what can wait? What is within reach and what is only mental clutter? That ability to simplify under pressure is one of the clearest signs of real mental strength. Most people suffer because they try to carry the whole storm at once. They think about the next 10 consequences instead of the next right move. They argue with imaginary futures. They let one bad possibility expand until it fills the entire room. Then the body follows the mind into confusion. Breathing changes. Tension rises. Judgment narrows. What could have been handled step by step starts feeling impossible because the mind has turned a real situation into a total internal collapse. But chaos always becomes more manageable when the mind stops trying to swallow it whole. Sometimes clear thinking begins with one very simple decision: slow the moment down. Not externally, perhaps. Life may still be moving fast, but internally. You refuse to match the speed of the chaos. You let other people rush if they want to rush. You let the noise exist without immediately joining it. That inner slowing creates just enough space to see what deserves action and what is only emotional smoke. This matters in every kind of pressure. In conflict, it keeps you from answering the wrong issue. In work, it keeps you from wasting energy on what only feels urgent. In personal pain, it keeps one difficult moment from becoming a whole identity. Clear thought does not remove chaos, but it stops chaos from spreading into everything. Marcus Aurelius understood that the mind can either add disorder or restore order. He kept returning to the need to see things as they are, stripped of exaggeration, stripped of drama, stripped of the emotional fog that makes ordinary hardship feel larger than life. That kind of seeing is not cold, it is merciful. It protects you from the unnecessary suffering created by distorted interpretation, and that is often where the real battle is. Because in chaotic moments, the first version of the story is usually not the wisest one. The mind says, everything is going wrong. It says, this is too much. It says, I have to fix all of it right now. But very often, none of that is true. Very often, only one thing needs your attention first. Only one conversation matters now. Only one decision must be made. Only one step is truly available. The rest is pressure trying to turn itself into authority. Once you see that, your power starts coming back. You stop getting hypnotized by volume. You stop mistaking complexity for importance. You begin cutting through the mess instead of drowning in it. That does not mean you always feel calm immediately. It means your thinking begins to regain structure, even before your feelings fully settle. And often that is enough to change the entire outcome of the moment. This kind of clarity also protects your energy. A chaotic mind burns through strength quickly. It keeps reopening the same thought, rechecking the same fear, replaying the same problem from 10 angles without moving any closer to truth. Clear thinking ends that waste. It says, in effect, not everything deserves entry. Not everything deserves urgency. Not everything deserves me. That is a powerful shift, because the person who can think clearly in chaos becomes difficult to overwhelm. Life may still be noisy. Pressure may still be real, but the center holds longer. You start becoming someone who can remain useful in messy situations, instead of becoming another source of mess inside them. So when chaos comes, do not ask your mind to solve the entire storm. Ask it for honesty. Ask it for sequence. Ask it for the next true thing. Ask it to stop feeding noise and return to what can actually be seen, chosen, and handled. That is how clarity survives. And once clarity survives, chaos stops feeling quite so absolute. Chapter 11. Decide with clarity. A confused mind can turn even a good option into a bad decision. That is why clarity matters so much, not because every choice in life is huge, but because the quality of your decisions quietly shapes everything: your work, your peace, your relationships, your direction, your confidence. All of it is touched by what you choose when things are uncertain. And the truth is, many people do not suffer only because life is hard. They suffer because they keep deciding from fog. Fog made of fear, urgency, people-pleasing, emotional exhaustion, old wounds, and the desperate need to feel certain before they move. But clarity rarely arrives as perfect certainty. Most of the time, it shows up in a quieter form. It is the moment you stop trying to make a decision that removes all discomfort and start making one that matches truth, values, and long-term self-respect. That shift changes everything, because a lot of bad decisions are not really made from ignorance. They are made from emotional pressure. You know what is better, but you choose what is easier to tolerate for the next 10 minutes. You choose what avoids guilt. You choose what keeps someone happy. You choose what gives quick relief. Then later, you pay for that short-term comfort with confusion, regret, and the exhausting feeling that you betrayed yourself again. This is why clear decisions require more than intelligence. They require inner steadiness. When the mind is disturbed, it distorts. Fear makes small risks look enormous. Ego makes small insults look important. Loneliness makes unhealthy connections look meaningful. Impatience makes unfinished situations feel unbearable. Under enough emotional pressure, the mind stops asking, "What is right?" and starts asking, "What will make this feeling go away fastest?" That is a dangerous question to build a life on. A trained mind learns to wait before it decides from distortion. Sometimes that means not answering immediately. Sometimes it means stepping away from a conversation before agreeing to something. Sometimes it means sleeping on a choice because the version of you speaking right now is too tired, too angry, too hurt, or too eager to see clearly. There is strength in that pause. Not weakness, not indecision, strength. Because the person who can delay a decision until the inner noise settles is often protecting themselves from damage they would not be able to undo easily later. Good decisions usually come from a cleaner inner state. You do not need to know everything. You do not need guarantees. You do not need every possible outcome mapped out in advance. What you need is enough honesty to see what is actually influencing you. Are you choosing this because it is wise, or because you are afraid to disappoint someone? Are you saying yes because it fits your life, or because you do not want to sit with the discomfort of saying no? Are you holding on because something still matters, or because you are scared of emptiness? Questions like these clear a lot of fog. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to the idea of seeing things plainly, without the extra stories the mind adds when it is unsettled. That matters here, because many decisions become hard only after the mind decorates them with fear. You start imagining reactions, rejection, failure, awkwardness, regret, and suddenly a simple choice feels emotionally loaded. The mind turns one path into 10 imagined consequences and then calls that confusion careful thinking. But often it is not careful thinking. It is avoidance dressed up as complexity. Clarity has a different feeling. It does not always feel easy, but it feels clean. There is less performance in it, less inner begging, less mental bargaining. You may still feel sad making the decision. You may still feel nervous. You may still wish the situation were different. But underneath those feelings, there is a kind of steadiness that says, "This is the right move for me now." That is the feeling you learn to trust. And once you start trusting it, your decisions become stronger. You stop asking everyone else to tell you what your life should be. You stop turning every choice into a public debate. You become less vulnerable to pressure, less likely to abandon yourself, because the moment feels emotionally expensive. That does not mean becoming closed-minded. It means becoming rooted enough that outside voices do not drown out your own. There's also something else that matters here. Clear decisions build inner trust. Every time you make a choice that aligns with truth instead of immediate relief, you strengthen the relationship you have with yourself. You begin to see that you can face uncomfortable realities without collapsing into confusion. You begin to feel less scattered because your life is no longer being directed by whatever feeling is loudest in the moment. That kind of self-trust is hard to fake. It comes from evidence, from choosing well, especially when choosing well costs something. So the next time you feel stuck, do not rush to ask, "How do I make the perfect decision?" Ask something calmer and more useful. What becomes clearer when I stop listening to panic? That question can save you, because clarity is not about controlling the future. It is about refusing to let inner noise choose your path. And when your decisions start coming from steadiness instead of distortion, your whole life becomes harder to shake. Chapter 12. Tolerate discomfort. A lot of people are not losing because they are incapable. They are losing because they keep treating discomfort like a stop sign. The second something feels heavy, awkward, boring, uncertain, humiliating, or emotionally expensive, they start pulling away from the very thing that could have changed them. They leave the hard conversation too early. They quit the routine before it becomes strong enough to work. They abandon the plan the moment it stops feeling exciting. They confuse discomfort with danger, and because of that, they keep escaping moments that were actually trying to build them. This happens quietly. You sit down to focus, and after a few minutes your mind wants relief. You try to be disciplined, and suddenly your old habits start calling you back because they feel familiar. You begin something meaningful, but progress is slow, and now frustration starts whispering that maybe this is not for you. None of these moments look dramatic from the outside, but they are important because they reveal a pattern. The mind has learned to chase ease and distrust tension. That pattern will keep your life small. Anything that matters asks something from you before it gives anything back. Strength asks for repetition before confidence. Skill asks for clumsy effort before mastery. Healing asks you to sit with feelings you would rather outrun. Better relationships ask for honesty that may feel uncomfortable at first. Real growth almost never arrives wrapped in immediate emotional reward. It usually begins in irritation, doubt, friction, inconvenience, and the strange feeling that your old self is being asked to let go of familiar ways of coping. That is why tolerating discomfort is such a serious form of mental training. It allows you to remain present long enough for change to happen. Without that ability, the mind keeps running back to whatever feels easy in the short term. It goes back to distraction because focus feels too demanding. It goes back to delay because action feels too exposing. It goes back to comfort habits because effort feels too uncertain. Then a person starts believing they have a motivation problem, when often the deeper issue is that they never learned how to stay in the room when discomfort arrives. That is the real work. Not pretending discomfort is pleasant, not forcing yourself to enjoy every hard thing, just learning not to panic when the process stops feeling good. Learning to say, in effect, "This feels uncomfortable, but that does not mean I need to escape it right now." That sentence can change a life. It keeps you from giving so much authority to passing feelings. It teaches the mind that strain is survivable, that boredom is survivable, that emotional tension is survivable, that not every unpleasant state requires immediate relief. The Stoics understood this in a deep way. They knew the mind becomes fragile when it is trained to expect comfort as a condition for functioning. Once that expectation takes hold, even ordinary difficulty starts feeling unfair. But when you become more willing to bear discomfort without dramatizing it, your range expands. You become more capable, more stable, less easy to break. You can see this in simple things. The person who can sit with the urge to quit becomes more reliable. The person who can stay present in an awkward moment becomes more mature. The person who can work through boredom becomes more dangerous in the best sense, because now progress is no longer dependent on emotional entertainment. Their life starts moving because they stopped asking comfort for permission. That does not mean every discomfort should be obeyed blindly. Some pain is a warning. Some environments truly are destructive. Some situations do need to be left. But many of the discomforts that shape us are not signs to run. They are signs that something real is being asked of us. Effort feels uncomfortable. Restraint feels uncomfortable. Patience feels uncomfortable. Growth often feels uncomfortable because the old self always resists being replaced. So the next time discomfort shows up, do not ask only, "How do I get rid of this?" Ask something better. What is this moment trying to train in me? Sometimes the answer will be patience, sometimes courage, sometimes humility, sometimes endurance, sometimes the simple ability to stay. Because once you stop treating discomfort as an enemy, you stop abandoning yourself every time growth gets hard. And that is when real change starts becoming possible. Chapter 13. Endure uncertainty. Uncertainty breaks a lot of people before life ever does. Not because the situation is impossible, but because the mind keeps demanding guarantees that reality was never going to give. It wants to know how things will end before it commits. It wants proof before effort, safety before movement, certainty before trust, and control before peace. When those things do not come, the mind starts shaking. It hesitates, overthinks, delays, and keeps circling the same questions until exhaustion starts feeling like wisdom. But it is not wisdom. It is fear trying to protect itself from the pain of not knowing. That is why uncertainty feels so heavy. It leaves room for imagination, and an untrained mind usually fills that room with worst-case stories. The job might fail. The relationship might not work. The risk might embarrass you. The waiting might end badly. The decision might be wrong. The future might not reward the effort. Once that inner spiral begins, people often stop moving altogether. They call it being careful, but many times they're simply trying to avoid the emotional cost of being human in a world where outcomes are never fully guaranteed. And that cost is real. There is something deeply uncomfortable about giving your energy to a path before you know how it will turn out. There is something vulnerable about doing the work without applause, loving without certainty, committing without total control, and taking one honest step when the whole staircase is still hidden. Most people do not struggle only with hard work. They struggle with unclear work. They can tolerate effort better than ambiguity. They can endure pain more easily than not knowing when the pain will end. That is exactly where mental strength gets tested, because a strong mind is not just one that can handle pressure after the facts are clear. It is one that can keep walking while the facts are still incomplete. It can carry the weight of an unfinished answer without turning that unfinished answer into panic. It can stay loyal to the next right move, even while the future remains silent. This changes the way you live. When you stop demanding certainty before action, you stop wasting so much of your life at the edge of decisions. You stop waiting for impossible reassurance. You stop asking the future to sign a contract before you agree to grow. You begin to understand that uncertainty is not always a signal that something is wrong. Very often, it is simply the price of moving forward in a real life. Marcus Aurelius had a way of returning to what was in front of him instead of becoming trapped by what was still unknown. That lesson matters here. You do not need full control of what happens next. You need enough steadiness to handle what is here now. That is a very different way of carrying uncertainty. Instead of asking, "What if this all goes wrong?" you begin asking, "What is mine to do in this moment?" That question brings the mind back from imagined futures into present responsibility. And present responsibility is much lighter than endless mental prediction. A lot of suffering comes from trying to solve tomorrow with today's fear. You replay possibilities that have not happened. You rehearse losses that may never arrive. You demand emotional closure from situations that are still unfolding. The mind mistakes this for preparation, but in many cases it is only self-torment. It drains energy without creating clarity. It keeps you busy without making you stronger. Enduring uncertainty asks for something better. It asks for patience with tension. That means learning how to stay grounded while answers are still forming. It means not rushing into bad decisions just because the waiting feels uncomfortable. It means not abandoning good work just because the results are late. It means accepting that some seasons of life can only be lived through, not fully figured out in advance. There is maturity in that. A person who can endure uncertainty becomes much harder to shake. They do not need every chapter explained before they begin reading it. They are less likely to collapse when life withholds immediate answers. They stop confusing delay with failure. They stop treating the unknown as an insult. Instead, they begin building a quieter kind of trust, Not trust that everything will go exactly as they want, but trust that they can meet reality as it comes. That kind of trust is powerful. It keeps you moving when other people freeze. It helps you stay thoughtful when others become desperate for premature certainty. It protects you from forcing clarity where only time can provide it. More than anything, it teaches your mind a truth that changes how you carry your whole life. Not knowing is uncomfortable, but it is not unbearable. So when uncertainty shows up, do not rush to escape it just to calm yourself down for an hour. Stay with it a little longer. Breathe inside it. Keep your hands on what is still yours to do. Let the future remain unwritten for now. Because the person who can endure uncertainty without surrendering to panic becomes someone life cannot easily intimidate. Chapter 14. Use stress wisely. Stress is not always the enemy. Sometimes it is just energy arriving without direction. That is why it affects people so differently. One person gets pressure and becomes sharper, more alert, more focused on what matters. Another gets the same pressure and starts spinning, rushing, overreacting, or shutting down completely. The difference is not always the amount of stress. Very often, it is the way the mind receives it. If your mind interprets stress as proof that you are losing control, then stress starts breaking you from the inside. If your mind learns to read it as a signal to organize, simplify, and respond with more discipline, then stress can become something you work with instead of something that immediately owns you. Most people never learn that. They only know two modes. Either they collapse under stress, or they pretend it is not there until it bursts out somewhere else. They push too hard, then crash. They bottle it up, then become irritable, distracted, emotionally unavailable, mentally foggy, and physically tired without fully understanding why. Stress does not disappear just because you ignore it. It changes form. It leaks into your sleep, your tone, your patience, your decisions, your focus, and even your body. That is why learning to use stress wisely matters so much. It protects you from being ruled by pressure you never actually faced with awareness. The first shift is simple but important. Stress does not always mean something is wrong. Sometimes it means something matters. A difficult conversation creates stress because the relationship matters. A challenge creates stress because growth is asking something from you. Responsibility creates stress because your actions carry weight. Even positive change can create stress because the mind has to adapt to what is unfamiliar. If you treat every form of stress like a sign to retreat, you will keep backing away from situations that were actually trying to strengthen you. At the same time, stress becomes dangerous when it is left unexamined. When the mind does not know what to do with pressure, it starts wasting energy in all the wrong places. It exaggerates. It tries to solve 10 things at once. It keeps replaying the same problem without creating movement. It uses tension as fuel for mental chaos instead of disciplined action. This is where people wear themselves down, not only because life is demanding, but because they are carrying that demand badly. They are feeding the stress with more noise than the situation itself required. Using stress wisely begins by asking a better question. Not, how do I make this feeling disappear right now? But, what is this stress asking me to prepare for, protect, or handle? That question changes your posture immediately. It moves you from emotional resistance to practical engagement. Now, stress becomes information. Maybe it is telling you that your boundaries are weak. Maybe it is exposing poor planning. Maybe it is showing you that your body is exhausted, your environment is too noisy, your priorities are scattered, or your mind is trying to carry more than it can hold at once. Once you read it properly, stress becomes useful. That is where control returns. Because useful stress can sharpen attention. It can make you more present. It can strip away what is unnecessary and bring you back to the essential. Think about moments when you performed well under pressure. Usually, it was not because the stress vanished. It was because you stopped fighting its presence and started directing its energy. You became more deliberate, more awake, more selective. That is a skill, and like any skill, it gets stronger through practice. The Stoics understood that events themselves do not carry your final interpretation inside them. The mind adds that. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to the idea that difficulty can be turned into fuel if it's met with the right inner stance. That does not mean glorifying stress or pretending constant pressure is healthy. It means refusing to become mentally helpless in its presence. You learn how to work with the moment instead of making the moment heavier with panic. Sometimes that means slowing down instead of speeding up. This is one of the great paradoxes of mental strength. When stress rises, the untrained mind wants to move faster. It wants immediate answers, quick relief, rushed decisions, emotional discharge. But often the wiser move is to reduce. Fewer thoughts, fewer priorities, fewer reactions, more breath, more sequence, more order. Stress becomes manageable when the mind stops scattering itself. It becomes useful when it is converted into focus. And there is another side to this that matters just as much. Some stress is not meant to be optimized. It is meant to be respected. Your body has limits. Your mind has limits. If you keep ignoring the signals, eventually stress stops sharpening you and starts draining you. So using stress wisely also means knowing when recovery is part of the discipline. It means knowing that rest is not always avoidance. Sometimes it is maintenance. Sometimes stepping back for an hour is what allows you to return with the steadiness the situation actually needs. That balance is powerful. You stop seeing stress as a monster and start seeing it as a force that needs handling. Sometimes it asks for courage, sometimes for structure, sometimes for rest, sometimes for cleaner thinking. But once you stop fearing it blindly, it loses some of its power to intimidate you. You realize that pressure does not automatically have to turn into suffering. A great deal depends on what your mind does next. So the next time stress arrives, do not ask only how to escape it. Look at it more carefully. Ask what it is pointing to. Ask what kind of response would make you stronger instead of more scattered. Ask how you can carry this in a way that protects your mind instead of exhausting it. Because stress used badly will wear you down. Used wisely, it can sharpen the very part of you that life will keep asking to become stronger. Chapter 15. Recover fast. What hurts a lot of people is not the mistake itself. It is how long they stay inside it. One bad day turns into a bad week. One failure becomes a private identity. One rejection keeps replaying in the mind until it starts affecting things that had nothing to do with the original moment. This is where recovery matters. Not because strong people never get hit, but because they do not stay mentally trapped for longer than necessary. They feel the setback, they absorb the lesson, and then they return to themselves faster. That ability changes everything. Life keeps interrupting you. Plans fail. Energy drops. People disappoint you. You lose momentum. You say the wrong thing. You fall back into an old habit. You get emotionally thrown off by something you thought you had already outgrown. None of that is unusual. The real danger begins when the mind takes the setback and starts building a home inside it. Then the problem is no longer the event. The problem becomes the way you keep feeding it with rumination, shame, self-judgment, and delay. A lot of people think recovery means pretending nothing happened. It does not. Fast recovery is not denial. It is not emotional numbness. It is not forcing fake positivity 5 minutes after something painful. Real recovery is more honest than that. It allows the hit to register, but it refuses to let the hit define the whole day, the whole week, or the whole self. It says, in effect, that hurt, that mattered, but I am not going to keep bleeding into every area of my life because of it. That is a serious form of strength, because when something goes wrong, the mind often adds extra damage. It starts exaggerating. It starts speaking in absolutes. I ruined it. I'm back at the beginning. Nothing is changing. I always do this. Maybe this is just who I am. Once the mind starts talking like that, recovery slows down. You stop correcting the mistake and start identifying with it. You do not just feel disappointed. You become mentally loyal to disappointment. That is what makes people stay down longer than they need to. A trained mind learns how to break that pattern early. It knows how to separate the event from the identity. A missed day is a missed day, not a ruined life. A bad conversation is a bad conversation, not proof that you cannot handle relationships. A relapse into an old habit is a sign that something needs attention, not proof that all your progress was fake. That distinction matters because it keeps the moment from expanding beyond its real size. You can fix what you do not dramatize. This is one of the quiet advantages of emotional discipline. When the hit comes, you return to facts faster. What happened? What part was mine? What needs repair? What needs to be learned? What is the next clean step? Questions like these help you move. They interrupt the useless loop that keeps many people stuck in self-punishment long after the moment is over. Marcus Aurelius kept bringing himself back to the present task. There is wisdom in that. The mind loves to stay with the wound, but life keeps asking for the next responsible action. Recovery becomes faster when you stop worshipping the setback and return to what can still be done now. Not tomorrow, not after you feel perfect again. Now. That might mean apologizing quickly instead of replaying the mistake all day. It might mean getting back to the routine the next morning instead of turning one bad day into permission for a full collapse. It might mean accepting that you are disappointed, but still refusing to abandon your standards because of it. Fast recovery is often built from small acts of return. That return is powerful. Each time you come back sooner, you teach your mind something new. You teach it that disruption is not destiny. You teach it that a setback does not automatically earn control over the rest of your life. You teach it that pain can be felt without becoming permanent. Over time, this becomes one of the clearest forms of toughness. Not the ability to avoid falling, but the ability to stop turning every fall into a long identity crisis. There is also humility in fast recovery. It accepts that mistakes will happen, that energy will fluctuate, that some days will feel messy, and that being thrown off is part of being human. But it refuses to use humanity as an excuse for staying lost. It allows imperfection without surrendering to it. That balance matters. Too much harshness slows recovery because shame keeps you frozen. Too much softness slows recovery because indulgence keeps you passive. What works is steadiness, honest, calm, immediate return. So when something goes wrong, do not ask, how do I erase this feeling instantly? Ask something more useful. How quickly can I come back to what matters without lying to myself about what happened? That question leads you somewhere better. It makes recovery practical. It reminds you that strength is not measured only by how well you hold up during pressure, but by how well you return after the pressure knocks you off center. Because in real life, winning is not about never losing rhythm. It is about refusing to stay out of rhythm for too long. Chapter 16. Strengthen your focus. A weak focus makes life feel harder than it really is. Not because the task is always too big, but because your mind keeps leaving the task before it has had enough time to become clear. You sit down to work, and after a few minutes, your attention starts drifting. You begin a conversation, but part of your mind is somewhere else. You try to solve one problem, but 10 other thoughts rush in and start competing for space. By the end of the day, you may have spent energy, but very little of that energy moved in one clean direction. That is why so many people feel mentally tired without feeling truly productive. Their effort is real, but it is scattered. And scattered effort rarely creates deep results. Focus is what allows your mind to stay long enough with something for it to open. Without that steadiness, everything stays shallow. Work stays shallow. Thinking stays shallow. Even self-understanding stays shallow because the mind keeps escaping before it reaches anything solid. A distracted person may look busy, may even feel busy, but internally there is often very little depth. The attention is constantly being broken, redirected, claimed by something easier, louder, newer, or more emotionally stimulating. That pattern weakens you in ways that are easy to miss. When focus is weak, you start underestimating what you are capable of, not because you truly lack ability, but because you rarely stay with anything long enough to let your ability fully show up. You interrupt your own momentum, you break your own concentration, you keep resetting the mind before it can build force. Then you look at the unfinished work, the slow progress, the lack of clarity, and you assume something is wrong with you. But often the issue is simpler than that. Your mind has not been trained to remain with what matters. That training is becoming more valuable every year. The modern world rewards interruption. It conditions you to expect novelty, quick stimulation, easy switching, constant input. Your mind gets used to being pulled every few seconds, and after a while, stillness starts feeling strange. Depth starts feeling demanding. One task starts feeling too quiet, too slow, too narrow. That is when distraction becomes more than a habit. It becomes a preference of the nervous system. The mind begins craving interruption because interruption feels easier than sustained effort. This is why strengthening focus is not just about productivity. It is about reclaiming authority over your inner life. A mind that cannot stay with one thing is easy to influence, easy to derail, easy to exhaust. It keeps reacting to whatever flashes in front of it. But a mind that can stay, return, and go deeper becomes harder to control from the outside. It develops weight. It develops patience. It develops the ability to think past the first surface layer of a problem and reach something more useful. That kind of focus changes the quality of everything. Your work improves because your thinking stops breaking apart every few minutes. Your emotional life improves because attention is no longer feeding every passing disturbance. Your relationships improve because presence becomes more real. Even your confidence improves because there is something powerful about knowing you can hold your mind where you choose instead of watching it run in 10 directions all day. But focus does not get stronger through wishing. It gets stronger through repetition, through bringing the mind back again and again, without drama, without self-attack, without turning distraction into a personal failure. You notice that your attention wandered, and you return. You notice the urge to check, scroll, switch, escape, and you return. You notice the discomfort of staying with one thing when your mind wants relief, and you stay a little longer. These moments seem small, but this is exactly how focus is built. Not in one heroic effort, but in many quiet recoveries. That matters because focus is not perfection. It is loyalty. It is the willingness to keep giving your attention back to what deserves it. A focused mind is not one that never wanders. It is one that has learned how to come back faster and waste less time living in fragmentation. Over time, those returns create force. They create depth. They create a feeling of inner coherence that distracted living slowly destroys. There is something deeply stabilizing about that. You stop feeling so divided inside yourself. You stop starting everything and finishing very little. You stop letting the easiest stimulus keep outranking your real priorities. The mind begins to trust that it can stay with effort, with silence, with complexity, with unfinished work, with the slow middle part where most people give up or drift away. That is where real advantage begins, because once your focus gets stronger, distraction loses some of its power to seduce you. Noise is still there, but it does not own the room. You become more selective, more deliberate, less available to interruption, and slowly, almost quietly, your life starts moving with more force because your attention is no longer leaking everywhere. So strengthen your focus with respect, not aggression. Train it daily. Bring it back when it wanders. Protect it when the world tries to scatter it. Stay a little longer than is comfortable. Because the person who can hold attention steadily is not just more productive, they are far more difficult to shake. Chapter 17. Protect your energy. There are days when nothing disastrous happens, and yet by the evening you feel used up. Your body is there, your schedule may even look normal, but something inside you is thin. You are easier to irritate, slower to think, less patient with people, less willing to do the work that actually matters. That kind of exhaustion is not always about doing too much. Very often, it comes from letting too many things touch your mind without any filter. Energy works like that. It is spent long before you notice it is gone. A difficult conversation can stay with you for hours after it ends. A phone full of noise can leave your attention restless even when you are no longer looking at it. The wrong people can make you feel heavy without openly attacking you. There are habits that drain you quietly, environments that scatter you, and little daily patterns that keep pulling pieces out of you until you no longer have your best self available for the parts of life that actually deserve it. That is why protecting your energy is not some soft idea. It is practical. It affects the quality of your thinking, your emotional control, your discipline, your presence, even the standards you are able to hold when the day gets hard. Once your energy is low, almost everything becomes more difficult than it needed to be. The task feels bigger. The setback feels more personal. The distraction looks more attractive. The wrong reaction gets closer to the surface. A lot of people do not notice this because they only respect energy after they are already depleted. They wait until they feel burned out, overwhelmed, resentful, mentally foggy, and then they start asking what went wrong. Usually the answer is not hidden. Too much access was given. Too much attention was handed over. Too much of the day was spent reacting instead of directing. You answered what did not need an answer, carried what did not belong to you, and stayed mentally involved in things that offered nothing back except noise. When that becomes normal, your life starts moving with less force. You may still be trying, you may still care, but the deeper strength behind your effort is weaker because so much of it has already been spent before you reached your real priorities. That is the part many people miss. The danger is not only tiredness, it is misallocation. You give your best energy to irritation, obligation, digital overstimulation, pointless tension, and emotional clutter. Then bring your leftovers to your work, your growth, your health, your family, your peace. No one can live well that way for long. Protecting your energy begins with honesty. You have to notice what leaves you clear and what leaves you crowded. Some conversations sharpen you. Others stay in your head like smoke. Some routines strengthen you. Others create a kind of invisible weakness that only shows up later when you need steadiness and cannot find it. Some people respect your limits. Others keep reaching into your day, your attention, your mood, and your nervous system, as if all of it were public property. Once you start seeing that clearly, you stop calling everything just life. You become more intentional. You answer later. You say no sooner. You stop over-explaining. You step back from what keeps draining you. You become less available to chaos, less willing to let every opinion, message, request, or mood enter your inner space. Not because you are becoming cold, but because you are finally understanding that your energy has a job. It is meant to support a life, not to be wasted proving you are nice, available, or endlessly adaptable. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to the need to guard the mind from unnecessary disturbance. That matters here because disturbance is expensive. It steals more than comfort. It steals clarity. And once clarity is weakened, you start living more reactively than you realize. The people who move through life with real steadiness usually are not stronger because they feel less. Often they simply protect their inner resources better. They recover before they collapse. They limit what drains them. They know that attention is not free, emotional labor is not free, and constant exposure to noise always has a cost. They have learned that peace is easier to keep than to rebuild. So pay attention to what your days are doing to you. Notice what keeps leaving you mentally crowded. Be more careful with what you allow repeated access to. Put your best energy where it can build something. Let less of it leak into places that only weaken your mind and steal your direction. Because once your energy is protected, a lot of things begin working again. Your focus comes back. Your patience lasts longer. Your reactions soften. Your discipline feels less forced. You stop feeling as if you are dragging yourself through the day. And from that place, you can finally give your life something better than what is left over. Chapter 18. Guard your environment. You can have good intentions and still keep losing ground because the space around you is quietly working against you. That is something people underestimate all the time. They think change is mostly about willpower, mindset, and discipline, as if the mind operates in isolation. But it does not. Your surroundings are always shaping you in small, repeated ways. The room you wake up in, the noise you live inside, the people you spend the most time around, the digital input you keep consuming, the level of order or disorder around your body, all of it leaves a mark. Not always dramatically, but steadily. And steady influence is what builds a life. This is why some environments make you feel heavier without you fully understanding why. You sit down to work, and your mind feels scattered before you even begin. You try to reset, but the space around you keeps pulling you back into old habits. You want peace, but everything around you is urgent, loud, messy, stimulating, or emotionally draining. After a while, you start blaming yourself for lacking discipline, when part of the problem is that your environment keeps training the opposite of the state you are trying to build. The mind absorbs more than it admits. A chaotic room makes clarity harder. Constant noise makes focus more fragile. Being around reactive people changes your nervous system, even if you tell yourself it does not. Endless exposure to shallow input weakens your attention, and makes silence feel unnatural. None of this excuses weak choices, but it does explain why some people feel like they are always fighting uphill. They are trying to build strength in places that keep rewarding distraction, comfort, or emotional instability. That is why guarding your environment is not a minor detail. It is part of mental training. The truth is, your habits do not live only inside you. They live in what surrounds you. They are supported or sabotaged by what is near you every day. If your space makes distraction easy, distraction will keep feeling natural. If your phone is filled with noise, noise will keep reaching your mind before your own thoughts do. If the people around you normalize drama, laziness, self-pity, or weak standards, you will have to spend extra energy just to stay clear about who you are trying to become. That kind of friction wears people down. A strong environment does the opposite. It reduces unnecessary struggle. It makes good choices easier to repeat. It protects your attention before your willpower even has to get involved. This can be very simple. A cleaner room can make a clearer mind more likely. A quieter morning can change the entire tone of the day. Distance from draining people can return more energy than motivation speeches ever will. Even small changes in what you see, hear, and reach for first can alter the direction of your mind more than people expect. There is something honest in admitting this. You stop pretending you are unaffected by what you live around. You stop making self-discipline harder by keeping yourself surrounded by things that constantly weaken it. That is not fragility. It is intelligence. A wise person does not only train their mind to resist bad influence, they also reduce unnecessary exposure to it. The Stoics understood that the mind must be guarded. They knew repeated impressions matter. What enters often begins shaping what stays. Marcus Aurelius kept bringing himself back from outside disturbance, but even that reminds you of something important. Disturbance is real. It does affect the mind. So the goal is not to act invincible while living carelessly. The goal is to create conditions that help your better self stay available. That may mean changing what you consume. It may mean spending less time in places that leave you agitated. It may mean creating more order around your body so your thoughts stop feeling so crowded. It may mean admitting that some people take more from your inner world than you can keep offering. It may mean protecting your mornings, guarding your evenings, or refusing to let your attention be claimed the moment you wake up. These choices matter because environment is not neutral. It is either helping you remember who you are trying to become or helping you forget. And once you see that clearly, you stop treating your surroundings as background. You start treating them as part of your discipline. You shape your space with more care. You become more selective about what gets repeated around you. You notice the difference between places that support your mind and places that slowly erode it. That awareness alone changes a lot. Because in the end, your environment does not need to control you to influence you. It only needs repeated access. So guard it, clean it up, reduce what disturbs you. Put more of your life in places that call out steadiness instead of chaos. Give your mind a setting that supports the person you are trying to become. Sometimes growth begins with an inner decision. Sometimes it begins with changing what keeps surrounding that decision every day. Chapter 19. Master your habits. In difficult moments, you do not rise to some ideal version of yourself. You usually fall back on what you have practiced. That is why habits matter so much. They decide what happens when your mind is tired, when pressure is high, when motivation disappears, when the day goes sideways, when life stops feeling inspiring and starts asking for steadiness. In those moments, you rarely build a brand new response from scratch. You reach for what is familiar. You follow the path your mind and body already know. If that path is weak, chaotic, or inconsistent, the moment exposes it immediately. A lot of people wait until life gets hard to become disciplined. By then, it is usually too late for that day. When stress hits, whatever is untrained becomes unreliable. You start reaching for distraction, comfort, avoidance, excuses, delay, old coping patterns, anything that gives short relief. Then later, once the moment passes, you tell yourself that next time you will be stronger. But strength is not usually created in the middle of the test. It is built beforehand in the small repetitions that looked unimportant when life was calm. This is where habits become more than a productivity topic. They become part of your character. A habit is simply a choice repeated enough times that it stops needing constant debate. That is what makes it powerful. It removes friction. It shortens the distance between knowing and doing. Instead of negotiating with yourself every time, you start moving with less internal noise. That matters more than people think, because a great deal of mental exhaustion comes from repeated decision-making. Should I do it now or later? Should I skip it this once? Should I stay with the plan or just follow how I feel today? A strong habit answers some of those questions before they have the chance to drain you. Once that starts happening, your life gets more stable. You no longer need a dramatic emotional state to do basic things well. You wake up and move. You sit down and focus. You return to your work. You train. You recover. You protect your time. You keep small promises. None of it looks exciting from the outside, but that is exactly why it matters. Habits carry you through ordinary days, and ordinary days make up your life. What makes this even more important is that habits shape identity quietly. They keep telling you who you are. If you keep breaking your word to yourself, your mind notices. If you keep returning to discipline, your mind notices that too. Over time, it becomes harder to pretend. Your repeated actions start becoming evidence. That evidence affects confidence in a deep way. Real confidence is not just a feeling. It is often the memory of how you have been living. When your daily patterns are weak, self-trust weakens with them. When your habits begin matching your standards, something steadier grows underneath you. This is one reason the Stoics cared so much about practice. They did not treat wisdom as a mood. They treated it as something that had to be embodied repeatedly until it shaped the person. Marcus Aurelius did not remind himself of principles because one reminder solved the problem forever. He returned to them because the mind is trained by repetition. So is discipline. So is calm. So is restraint. So is the ability to do what matters, even when a part of you would rather drift. Still, mastering habits does not mean trying to become mechanical. It means making your better choices easier to repeat and your weaker choices harder to fall into. It means paying attention to what starts your day, what weakens your evenings, what breaks your focus, what restores your clarity, and what patterns keep repeating whether you like them or not. Once you begin noticing that, you stop treating your behavior like a mystery. You start seeing the loops. One choice opens the door to the next. One careless hour affects the next 3. One strong routine can save you from 10 unnecessary battles later in the day. That is why the smallest habits are often carrying more weight than they seem to. The way you begin the morning, the way you speak to yourself after a mistake, the way you respond when you do not feel like doing the work, the way you recover after being thrown off. These little patterns either build structure or weaken it. At first, the effect seems minor, then 1 month passes, then 6, then a year. And now what used to be occasional behavior has become the tone of your life. So if you want to be stronger in hard moments, stop asking only how to be stronger in hard moments. Ask what you have been rehearsing on ordinary days. Ask what your current habits are preparing you for. Ask whether the way you live each day is quietly making you easier to shake or harder to break. Because when habits are mastered, difficult moments stop feeling like completely new battles. You have already been training for them. And that is when discipline begins to feel less like force and more like who you are becoming. Chapter 20. Build mental toughness. A mentally tough person is not someone who never feels pressure, pain, or doubt. It is someone who can keep their shape while moving through those things. That difference matters because many people confuse toughness with hardness. They imagine a person who shuts everything down, feels nothing, needs no one, and pushes through every situation by force alone. But that kind of hardness often breaks in its own way. It becomes rigid, defensive, emotionally cut off, and exhausted underneath the surface. Real toughness is stronger than that. It bends without collapsing. It absorbs impact without losing direction. It stays connected to reality without becoming fragile in front of it. You start seeing the need for that kind of strength when life stops cooperating. Plans change. People disappoint you. Progress slows down. You give effort and get no quick reward back. Some seasons feel unfair. Others feel empty. There are moments when you are tired of carrying responsibility, tired of waiting, tired of trying to stay disciplined while your emotions keep asking for an easier road. In those moments, toughness is not about looking strong. It is about staying available to what your life still requires from you. That is where a lot of people get tested. Some fall apart. The second life becomes uncomfortable. Others keep functioning on the outside, but inside they become bitter, cynical, or numb. Neither response is true toughness. One collapses. The other hardens in the wrong way. Mental toughness lives somewhere else. It keeps your core intact. It lets you feel the weight of the moment without becoming that weight. It allows disappointment without turning into defeat. It allows fear without handing fear the final word. This is built over time, usually in ways that do not look dramatic. You build it when you stay with responsibility after the excitement is gone. You build it when life feels uncertain and you keep taking the next step anyway. You build it when your emotions are loud, but your behavior stays aligned with your values. It grows when you stop making every difficult moment into a personal insult and start seeing some of them as part of the cost of becoming stronger. That shift is important. A fragile mind keeps asking, why is this happening to me? A tougher mind starts asking, how do I carry this well? The event may be the same, but the posture is different. One response drains you. The other begins organizing you. One pulls you towards self-pity. The other keeps you closer to responsibility. The Stoics understood this better than most. They never promised a painless life. What they offered was a different relationship with difficulty. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to the idea that hardship can train character if you stop treating it only as an interruption. That does not mean enjoying pain or pretending suffering is noble by itself. It means not wasting every hard season by resisting the fact that it is here. Toughness often begins there, in acceptance. Not passive acceptance, honest acceptance. This is what the moment is. This is what I feel. This is what I still need to do. That kind of clarity saves energy. It keeps the mind from turning one burden into two. You already have the challenge in front of you. There is no need to add mental rebellion on top of it every second. Once you stop arguing so much with reality, you have more strength left to meet it. Another part of toughness is recovery. A mentally tough person is not always the one who never gets shaken. It is often the one who regains balance sooner. They do not build a whole identity around one bad chapter. They do not let pain become the center of every thought. They take the hit, learn what they can, and return to their path with less drama. That is toughness too. Quiet return, stable continuation, refusal to let the difficult moment become the whole story. There is also humility in real toughness. It knows limits. It knows when rest is needed, when silence is wiser than force, when support matters, when pushing harder would only create more damage. That makes it more dependable, not less. A person who only knows how to force things will eventually become reckless with themselves. A tougher mind stays committed without becoming self-destructive. So if you want to build mental toughness, stop trying to become emotionally invincible. That is not the goal. Become steadier instead. Become harder to throw off course. Learn how to stay present in hard moments without letting them rewrite who you are. Let challenge strengthen your structure, not steal it. Because in the end, toughness is not the absence of struggle. It is the ability to remain yourself while moving through it. Chapter 21. Show up consistently. There is a kind of strength that does not look dramatic at all. It is not loud. It does not depend on perfect timing, a powerful mood, or one big breakthrough. You see it in the person who keeps returning, the one who comes back to the work after a hard day, back to the standard after a weak moment, back to the path after losing rhythm for a while. Over time, that kind of consistency becomes more powerful than intensity ever could. A lot of people underestimate this because they are too impressed by extremes. They admire sudden motivation, massive effort, emotional speeches, and short bursts of discipline. Those things can feel exciting, and sometimes they do help. But life is rarely changed by what you do once in a dramatic mood. It is changed by what you keep doing when the mood is gone, when no one is watching, and when progress is too quiet to give you instant emotional reward. That is where consistency starts separating people. Some disappear every time life becomes inconvenient. They need ideal conditions to stay committed. They are strong for a few days, then distracted for a few weeks. They restart often, but they do not remain long enough for anything deep to form. The problem is not that they have no potential. Usually they have plenty. What they lack is the ability to keep showing up without needing every internal and external condition to cooperate. And that ability matters more than talent in a lot of situations. When you show up consistently, your mind begins to trust you. That may be one of the most valuable things consistency builds. It is not just progress in the outside world, it is proof inside yourself. You stop seeing yourself as someone who only works well in short emotional waves. You begin to feel more solid because your actions are no longer so dependent on feeling inspired, noticed, or immediately rewarded. There is evidence now. You came back yesterday. You came back today. You will likely come back tomorrow too. That kind of evidence is quiet, but it changes the way you carry yourself. Consistency also removes a lot of unnecessary drama from growth. You stop asking whether every day felt amazing. You stop treating every dip in motivation like a personal crisis. You stop making each setback mean that everything has collapsed. Instead, you return. You adjust where needed, but you do not disappear. That steadiness gives your life a kind of rhythm, and rhythm is powerful. It keeps you moving even when emotion is unreliable. Marcus Aurelius understood the importance of daily return. He did not write to himself because one reminder was enough for life. He wrote because the mind forgets. It drifts. It weakens. It gets pulled by comfort, irritation, ego, fatigue. What mattered was not never being disturbed. What mattered was coming back to what was true and necessary again and again. That is consistency in its deepest form. There will be days when your best is smaller than it was last week. Days when the work feels flat, the mind feels crowded, the result feels far away, and the old temptation to delay starts sounding reasonable again. Those are the moments that teach you whether your commitment is real. Not because you have to perform perfectly, but because you still choose not to abandon the path just because the day feels heavier. That is an important distinction. Consistency is not perfection. It is continuity. It allows bad days without letting them become a new identity. It leaves room for fatigue, recovery, slower seasons, and imperfect effort. But it does not let any of those things turn into complete withdrawal. The person who keeps a connection to the path, even in a reduced form, stays alive inside the process. The one who constantly vanishes has to keep rebuilding momentum from the beginning. And beginning over and over again is exhausting. So much of long-term success comes from refusing to make every interruption bigger than it is. Miss a step, then return. Lose a day, then return. Feel discouraged, then return. Get distracted, learn from it, then return. In the long run, the return matters almost as much as the original effort, maybe more. It is what keeps growth from becoming a series of abandoned versions of yourself. So do not underestimate what happens when you simply keep showing up. A steady person becomes difficult to compete with because life can no longer remove them so easily. They do not need to be the most intense in every moment. They only need to remain, and often that is exactly what wins. Chapter 22. Turn discipline into identity. At some point, discipline has to become more than something you keep forcing. If it always feels like a fight between who you are and what you need to do, the process becomes exhausting. You may still make progress for a while, but everything costs too much. Every good habit feels unnatural. Every strong decision feels like an argument. Every return to the path feels like dragging yourself back toward a version of life your mind still treats like a stranger. That kind of effort can work in short bursts, but it rarely creates peace. Sooner or later, the deeper question appears. Not, can I be disciplined today, but who am I becoming through these repeated choices? That is where real change begins to settle. Because the strongest form of discipline is not the kind that depends on constant pressure. It is the kind that starts feeling honest, natural, aligned. Not easy, necessarily, but no longer foreign. You stop acting disciplined only when you feel threatened, guilty, inspired, or temporarily motivated. Instead, you begin moving from a quieter place. You keep your word because that is becoming part of your character. You protect your focus because your mind is no longer available for constant theft. You do the work because you are building a life that asks for that level of seriousness. This shift matters more than people realize. When discipline stays outside your identity, it is always vulnerable. A bad mood can interrupt it. A difficult week can weaken it. One emotional season can make it feel optional again. But once discipline starts moving inward, once it becomes part of how you see yourself, something changes. The standard no longer feels like an outside demand. It feels like self-respect. Following through no longer feels like punishment. It feels like coherence. You're not just doing disciplined things. You're becoming someone who does not need to betray himself every time life gets uncomfortable. That makes you steadier, A person with borrowed discipline can look strong for a while. They can follow a plan, copy a routine, repeat the right language, and hold themselves together under good conditions. But when life presses harder, borrowed discipline starts cracking. Identity-based discipline holds differently. It has roots. It survives inconvenience better because it is not built only on effort. It is built on self-definition. There is a quiet sentence underneath it. This is who I am now. This is how I live. Of course, that kind of identity is not built through talk. It is built through evidence, through repetition, through all the days when you could have drifted and chose not to, through the mornings you got up anyway, through the boundaries you held even when they were misunderstood. Through the moments you stayed calm, returned to focus, tolerated discomfort, and refused to let temporary emotion rewrite your direction. Those moments may seem small while they are happening, but they accumulate. The mind remembers. It starts building a new self-image from what you repeatedly do. That is why discipline becomes easier when it stops being theater. You are no longer trying to look strong. You are no longer collecting habits like decorations for an identity you have not earned yet. You are not performing self-control for an invisible audience. You are building trust with yourself, quietly, daily, honestly, and the more honest that process becomes, the less energy gets wasted pretending. A lot of people stay stuck because they keep trying to act like the disciplined version of themselves, instead of practicing until that version becomes real. Marcus Aurelius kept returning to the importance of living according to what is true and right, not merely admiring it. That applies here in a deep way. Discipline cannot stay a beautiful idea in your head. It has to become something your life can recognize, something your routines can confirm, something your choices reveal when nobody is watching. That is when it starts becoming identity. And once that happens, your relationship with effort changes. You still have difficult days. You still feel resistance. You still get tired, distracted, discouraged, and tempted by easier paths. But those moments no longer carry the same power to redefine you. They feel more like interruptions than identity. You know where home is now. You know what kind of person you are trying to be. So even when you slip, the return becomes cleaner, less dramatic, less full of self-negotiation. You come back because coming back matches who you are. That is a powerful place to reach. It means discipline is no longer something you visit. It becomes the ground you stand on. It shapes the way you speak, decide, recover, focus, work, rest, and carry yourself through pressure. Over time, this creates a life that feels less chaotic from the inside. Not because everything is under control, but because you are no longer so divided against yourself. And that may be the final victory in all of this. Not that you become perfect, not that you master every day, but that the habits, standards, and inner strength you once had to fight for so hard begin to feel like your natural language. Your life starts reflecting the person you were trying to become all along. Then discipline is no longer something you force. It is something you live. So this is what it really comes down to. Winning in every situation is not about controlling life. It is not about always getting the outcome you wanted, always feeling strong, always staying confident, or always knowing exactly what to do next. Life is too unpredictable for that. People change. Pressure shows up. Plans break. Emotions rise. Uncertainty stays longer than you hoped. Some days your mind feels clear, and some days it does not. The difference is no longer whether life becomes difficult. The difference is whether your mind stays with you when it does. That is the real victory. A mind that does not panic too quickly, A mind that can return to focus after distraction, return to discipline after weakness, return to calm after pressure, return to itself after the moment tries to pull it apart. That kind of strength changes the way you walk through everything. Work feels different. Conflict feels different. Pain feels different. Even failure feels different when your mind is no longer adding unnecessary chaos to what is already hard. And maybe that is the deeper truth behind all of this. You do not need to become superhuman. You do not need to destroy your emotions, become cold, or act like nothing touches you. You just need to become someone who can stay steady enough to choose well, even when life is not making it easy. That is a different kind of power. Quiet power, clean power, the kind that does not need to announce itself, because it shows up in how you think, how you recover, how you carry pressure, how you protect your attention, and how you keep moving when the old version of you would have collapsed, delayed, or drifted. If you take anything from this episode, let it be this. Train your mind before the moment tests it. Do that, and you will not need perfect conditions nearly as much as you think. You will not be as easy to shake. You will not need every emotion to cooperate before you act. You will start trusting yourself in a deeper way because you will know that when the pressure comes, you are less likely to disappear inside it. That is where winning starts. Not outside, inside. If this episode spoke to you, subscribe to the channel. And tonight, before you move on to the next distraction, sit with one honest question. When the next hard moment comes, will your mind work against you, or will it stand beside you?